Hello, I'm Charlie Brooker and you're watching Newswipe, a programme all about what's been happening. Like this. Media mourns as it loses earthbound rights to top-line content provider. Vandals target Fred the Shred's house. Maybe that giant photo wasn't such a good idea. And adult films on expenses. Jackie Smith's husband comes clean. Yeah. But first... It might sound like an odd statement, but the relationship between the news and what I like to think of as real people has shifted somewhat throughout the years.
Over to the newsroom.
Not so long ago, the news basically consisted of a bloke at a desk telling you, the viewer, what had happened that day, with the help of some reporters, some cheap graphics, and an irritating weatherman. Real people, i.e. us common or garden shoe-wearing schlubs, didn't get much of a look in, except, of course, if we'd witnessed something important.
She told me what happened after the first explosion.
And the second bomb didn't go off for a good 10 minutes after that.
But in the late 70s and early 80s, this began to change and real people started to have more input.
Don't you think we should be worried that the Chinese might flood our markets with even cheaper goods than the Japanese can and so destroy any surviving industry of...
Yeah, whatever, you bloody 6-year-old. The concept of the public having their say hit a peak in 1983 when housewife Diane Gould famously put the boot into Mrs Thatcher live on Nationwide's On the Spot segment.
Mrs Thatcher... Why, when the Belgrano, the Argentinian battleship, was outside the exclusion zone and actually sailing away from the Falklands, why did you give the orders to sink it?
But it was not sailing away from the Falklands. It was in an area which was a danger to our ships.
Mrs Thatcher, I am saying that nobody with any imagination can put it sailing other than away from the Falklands.
Mrs... I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
It's Mrs Comeuppance.
It was in an area which was a danger to our ships. Well, now, you accept that, do you?
No.
It was proof that real people's questioning of the facts could move the story forward for the journalists, so from this point on, their opinions were solicited more frequently, whether they were interesting or not. Hey, real people, what do you make of the pound coin?
I think a pound note has got more value than a pound coin.
Hey, real people, what do you think about public transport?
I prefer the railway, love, but I don't know how they've come with coach this time.
Looking back at old Vox Pops, it's striking how unemotional and objective they can seem, perhaps because the public thought that's what the news expected of them.
What happened to those around you?
Mutilated.
All of them? Or many of them?
Well, I vouch for 5 or 6.
Were many
I saw
of them
in my eyes.
What was the scene?
Well, bodies and torsos everywhere.
Were many of them your friends?
They're all my friends. I've been working with them for 10 years.
That situation changed with the death of Princess Diana in 1997. Here, the public's emotional reaction became the central focus of the story itself. It started out as shock and sorrow.
The outpouring of emotion just grows by the day. What had begun as a sea of flowers has now turned into an ocean.
Before mutating into anger.
Queen's not in residence today, but where the hell is the flag? Eh? You see what I'm saying about the establishment?
And it eventually altered the events themselves.
This afternoon provided the focal point the crowds had been demanding. Their sudden appearance on the Mall, just one of a series of fast-moving changes in which Buckingham Palace repeatedly bowed to the wishes of the people.
Well, I'm glad she's listened to, obviously, to the media, isn't she, and to the people.
Afterwards, the news was terribly pleased with itself for reflecting the feeling of the nation, for being so wonderfully inclusive, which is odd because the entire saga left me, and I suspect millions of other people like me, feeling weirdly alienated. Because I wasn't an anguished mourner. Diana's death didn't make me happy, but it didn't move me to come down to the palace and demand to see the Queen weeping on the pavement either. Inadvertently, what the news was doing was driving a wedge between regular people and emotional, demonstrative, and some might say overreactive people. And ever since Di's death, it's been this second group that's had more influence over the news agenda. That's why stories such as this angry ITN news piece on the Baby P report often lead on the emotional public outcry.
Baby P's grave is still surrounded by the thought and care he never had in life. No one was there to help you, reads this card.
The most recent example, of course, is the coverage of Jade Goody's death, the emotive nature of which has alienated many. We'll be looking at that later. In effect, the journalist and the public have swapped places. Instead of offering us a factual summary of events that we can then form an emotional opinion on, they're asking us for our emotional opinion and then incorporating it into their factual summary of events. That's one of the reasons we're asked our opinions more than ever via any one of the 10 million boneheaded say what you think viewer feedback systems, which often just cough up a load of boneheaded gunk.
Diane Aykroyd emailed to say the reason my children would never eat school meals is because they are, for the most part, vile slop. Oh dear.
Well, you know, instead of asking for emails, they might as well say, we're turning on the idiot magnet now. Well, now it's time for some of your views. We're going to switch on the idiot magnet, and our first message comes from Tony in Bristol, who says, bloody immigrants. Anyway, opinions and emotions are one thing, pictures are another. Now, anyone with an atom of sense in their head understands implicitly that in the real three-dimensional world, nobody wants to see your holiday snaps and home videos. Why? Because they're boring, and your kids are boring, and your holiday was boring, and you're f***ing boring. But sometimes they're not boring. Thanks to modern technology, anyone might capture an exciting moment of history at any time. Footage the news will gleefully use to become more dynamic, visceral and frightening than ever. The 2004 tsunami was a decisive moment for user content. Most of these terrifying clips had been gathered by traditional news agencies, which in turn sold them onto TV networks who ran them again and again and again. It was so exciting that the BBC set up a dedicated user-generated content department aimed at harvesting footage directly from the viewers. Shortly afterwards, 7/7 happened, and harrowing pictures sent in by those caught up in the attacks quickly made it directly onto the screen. People shot hours of footage. Now, of course, I can completely understand why you'd want to look through a viewfinder if you found yourself caught up in the middle of something like this. Seeing it all through a lens would somehow disconnect you from the misery of what was happening and make it seem less real. At least that's why I do it whenever I get caught up in a bloody argument in a bloody relationship.
You do absolutely nothing. I mean, do you even care about me? Have you ever loved me?
A few months after 7/7, another citizen journalism spectacular occurred as the Buncefield oil depot went up like an exploding oil depot.
Minutes after the first explosions, two young men took a video camera to within 50 metres of the fires. They defied official advice to keep away.
Yes, helpfully illustrating one of the potential pitfalls of citizen journalism, two amateur filmmakers raced towards the inferno with their lenses on. Aside from recklessly dumb visual observation, we also got to enjoy recklessly dumb vocal observation. As one of them said, it wasn't a fire, but actually Satan coming to Earth in the form of oil.
It is actually Satan coming to Earth in the form of oil.
See?
Imagine we were sitting right here when it went, and it did that to those buildings.
Yeah, I imagine we'd be dead.
Yeah, well, good job there aren't any oil tanks left to explode, yeah?
At one point, their camera zooms in on an oil tank yet to explode.
Well, this should be good. I hope they stick around.
We've got to make a move now because they're expecting another explosion. If there is another explosion, we're going to die.
Oh, come back. I was enjoying that, you chicken.
Their pictures are another example of the growing public involvement in the recording of major news events. They knew it was dangerous, but say their filming instincts took over from personal fear.
Still, at least the Buncefield footage was spectacular because it was a massive explosion and not, say, a bit of snow. Now, about 20 years ago, the news used to cover heavy snowfall like this. Moira Stewart, dressed in a straitjacket, barking a load of basic information about which trains weren't running.
And services to Sheffield and Newcastle are also disrupted.
And a few sternly voiced VT reports telling you what to do.
Emergency services have repeated their advice for people to stay inside, wrap up warm and not to venture out unless it's absolutely necessary.
Fast forward to earlier this year and a cold snap has suddenly become a chance to turn the news into a cuddly-wuddly multimedia slideshow.
Been getting hundreds of pictures, your pictures of the snow in different parts of the country. Let's take a look at some of them.
Oh yes, look, they got a photo of some snow and a photo of some more snow and a photo with some snow in it, and a photo showing what happens when it snows. And no matter how many they got, it seemed they still didn't have enough.
We would like your snow pictures, by the way, just to let you know where you can email them as we're watching this. Your pics at bbc.co.uk.
Eventually, the sheer amount of user-generated content they'd received became a self-congratulatory story in itself.
Now, over the past 24 hours, we've had the biggest response so far here at the BBC to any story that we've covered.
It's the weather.
35
50,000 pictures the BBC yesterday received of the weather. An absolutely amazing response, our biggest ever response.
Well, who'd have thought a national weather condition would have generated that many pictures?
Just to pop that into context for you, in total, the Buncefield oil fire depot, we received 15,000. So yesterday, 35,000 in one day. We just couldn't believe it.
How do you wade through all those pictures like that?
Yeah, how and why?
I think these pictures we're just looking at now, I mean, they're beautifully shot.
Still, it was fun to hear Bill Turnbull getting a bit Alan Partridge about some of the more jackassy clips.
Look at that, look at that.
That is dangerous. That really I would not recommend at all. It's probably illegal, and it's not something to do.
I don't know, maybe I'm mean-spirited, but when I see all these zany photos sent in by zany members of the public, I just want to run out into the street and start kicking people in the neck. Your snowman pictures, don't send them into the news. You know why? Because they're not news, they're snowman pictures. If the snowman's learned to talk or he's hanging Saddam Hussein, that's news. This is what news looks like, and this is what a snowman looks like. Can you see the difference? You know what? Paxman agrees with me.
In the meantime, it's all available again on the website, along with our editor's pathetic pleas for you to send some of us your old bits of home movie and the like, so we can become the BBC's version of Animals Do the Funniest Things. Good night.
Now, animals and man don't really mix unless you put them all in a blender, but they've mixed in the news this week. Here's a special animal-centric Week in Bullshit. They're fun and they don't need release forms. There's been loads of the furry shits in the news lately, like this painting cat thing on BBC Breakfast. 5 News cheered us up with this uplifting story of a disabled man who's turned his dog into a cheap meat-fuelled engine. This is very much the Channel 5 version of Ben-Hur.
Thank you, my love.
5 also brought us this startling evidence of Islam's influence on modern Britain, a horse in a hijab. But the most arousing animal story of the week has to be this. Lions! And 5 News run an astonishing report about a man who's watched far too many Walt Disney films and not enough Werner Herzog documentaries.
That's what you call a lion sandwich.
No, this is lion and a bit of panda. Got it from the garage.
In the wild, lions don't like water. But look at this. A young lioness playing with him in the river.
Oh, I hope they show him sticking it in a minute.
There are plenty who say that any human interaction with a wild animal is just wrong, but others say that this actually promotes the species in a way which should guarantee its long-term survival.
Here's a buddy.
Are you okay?
Yeah. This is normal.
MPs' expenses have been in the news again of late. 1 minute they're claiming money for a second home, you know, just like you can't. And the next their partner's adult viewing habits end up leaving a great big crusty stain all over their expense sheets. But are MPs really all out for themselves? Here's veteran political journalist Peter Oborne with his view. We've been asked to point out that the following represents the personal and some might say cynical views of veteran political commentator Peter Oborne, author of The Rise of Political Lying and the Triumph of the Political Class. Once again, these are views, not facts. Views, not facts.
When I went into political reporting 20, 15 years ago, I thought that MPs went in to serve the public good. What I came to realise, the core thing which happened in the House of Commons was not opposition, but collusion. The MPs of rival parties have far more in common with each other than they have in common with ordinary members of the public. That in fact they are, to a large extent, engaged in a conspiracy against the public. I'll give you an example. When Jackie Smith was caught up in her expenses controversy a few weeks ago, which looked very odd to ordinary members of the public, when she went into Home Office questions, and the Home Secretary took questions, there wasn't a single question from the Tory opposition or from the Liberal Democrats about her very peculiar expenses arrangements. And that is because attacking either party on expenses issues is like using an area weapon, i.e. it's going to destroy or kill off personnel on both sides. Labour now no longer would attack a Tory who's bent because there's too much at stake. If you go back a generation or two, people who came into the Commons, whether from the left or the right, the primary objective was to serve the country or to serve their voters, not to make money for themselves. What is new is that the majority of people now coming into Parliament have sought politics as a career ever since leaving universities. And therefore, what we see is the use of the House of Commons, use of MPs' alliances, the use of political connections as a way of making a huge sum of money. Very interesting to watch what happens to former ministers. Let's have a look at Tony Blair. You know, he's gone off to work for an American investment bank. He earns millions of pounds of money for that, giving very high-level consultancy about how to link business and politics. John Major, Blair's predecessor, joined the Carlyle Group, a very, very secretive, little-known organisation linked to the Bush family, whose whole sort of raison d'etre is to make money out of government privatisations and contracts. What it does is to cast doubt about the real integrity and independence of the advice these people are doing in office, because the people they're dealing with in office then come and give them jobs, incredibly well-paid jobs, afterwards. The political class funds party political activity in a completely different way to the system which prevailed after World War II. Because parties can't go to mass members anymore, there is one way they can use fund money, is by basically using that access to the process of government and selling that to interested parties in the business world. You go to the annual conference of the governing party, it's much more like a corporate away day than a party conference. And so businessmen who want to acquire access to the Prime Minister can get it, but they have to pay for it. And you get the emergence of these rather sinister figures, lauded in the press, never exposed, these people who broker. They broker between big business and the politicians. And they fix deals. I'll name them. I don't know if you have the balls to put this on air. Just maybe 2 or 3 others in London handle a lot of this business of brokering, normally or often secret or very private deals between very senior and rich businessmen and their political clans.
Yeah, is it recording? Yeah. It's going, yeah. Yeah, sorry, the remainder of this sequence has been removed on legal advice. Showbiz and former pop star turned bloated porridge-faced nation botherer David Van Day spices up morning pisscast the right stuff by chucking his girlfriend live on air.
I'm actually dating a lady, very beautiful lady, Sue Moxley from The Sun, beauty editor. Yeah.
Right.
Obsessed with fame.
She can't be that obsessed with fame. She's going out with David Van Day.
We eat out a lot. We do a lot of fine dining.
Well, anyway, where they'll let you wheel in a trough.
I've had enough. And so would I dump you now? Yes, I would. You've been dumped.
David.
Live on air, on TV, celebrity dumping.
You know, I think I've seen the pilot for David Van Day's celebrity dumping. It's horrible. Oh, and next up, it's national embarrassment. David Van Day, and here he goes. He's dropping his trousers. He's assuming the position. He's straining, he's straining, he's straining. Oh, and he's hit the target! He's hit the target! Well done, David, you absolute prick! The world of quantum physics, which, since you ask, I'm a huge expert on, gave us one of science's most famous thought experiments, the sorry fate of Schrödinger's cat. Now, I'm simplifying here, but essentially it hypothesised that if you put a cat in a box accompanied by a canister of poison gas that may or may not leak and shut the lid, then, according to quantum theory, once it was hidden from view, the cat would be neither dead or alive, but both dead and alive until you open the lid to observe it. That, in other words, it's possible for something to exist in 2 contradictory states at the same time, which is impossible, obviously, but it's also possible. It makes your head hurt. But that's the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics for you, eh, yeah? Anyway, at the risk of sounding pretentious, I'd like to apply this complex theory to the sad and paradoxical tale of Jade Goody. We all know who Jade Goody was, a none-too-bright reality TV star who became massively famous for simply existing, polarising opinion as she did so. Some loved her, some hated her, and some, of course, were indifferent either way. A lot of people said she was talentless, which wasn't strictly true. She wouldn't have been invited on feel-good entertainment shows like this repeatedly if she didn't have something. You know, let's face it, she had more star quality than Gordon Brown, and he's all over the telly.
Along with the sunshine, there's gonna be a little rain sometime.
In 2007, she was widely pilloried following apparent racism in a very ugly series of Celebrity Big Brother. She may have been the ringleader, but Jade didn't actually make the worst comments of all. Those were left to Smirky McChuckle Tits here.
I think she should fuck off home.
But by virtue of being the loudest and the most well-known, Jade bore the brunt of the criticism. And suddenly everyone hated her. Even the viewers of normally sedate GMTV.
Jade Goody is an absolute disgrace to Britain.
And then in upsetting scenes on the Indian version of Big Brother, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. Having lived in the spotlight for years, she carried on doing so, mainly, she said, in order to provide for her son's future. So she granted harrowing and distressing front-page interviews to the tabloids, allowed her physical deterioration to be recorded by a camera crew for a genuinely unsettling TV series, and sold the rights to her fairy tale wedding to OK magazine, turning it into a slick media event in the process. And finally, she died of an easily preventable illness at a tragically young age. The end. Except it's a bit more complicated than that. Jade's death was tragic, no question there. But the coverage of her death, well, that was hardly about death or Jade at all. Instead, it was about the news media having a collective self-perpetuating bun fight. Take the tabloid papers, which, having hurled buckets of misogynist abuse or eye-swivelling rage over Jade for years, suddenly had to perform a U-turn so huge it was visible from space and start gushing with cliched tabloid speak about inspiring bravery. It was almost as though the press felt guilty for treating her badly in the past, although, of course, the press doesn't feel anything, it just wants to sell more papers. That's why they willingly put her on the front cover as often as possible, veering into astronomical bad taste in a way that would simply alarm. Take this astonishing Daily Star front page from the 18th of February, which, as Private Eye pointed out, is actually a Photoshop version of this more jubilant photograph taken a year ago when Jade still had hair. It's amazing to think somebody actually did that. Somebody actually sat there, spending hours photoshopping out that hair, giving Jade retrospective cancer to sell their f***ing paper. And to think the press has the temerity to moan whenever TV gets accused of faking things. What twats. Speaking of things that want photoshopping, look at Peter Cushing here, aka Carol Malone. Here's someone who had to change her tune quicker than an iPod shuffle. Having berated Jade for 200 years in her shit and nasty newspaper columns, suddenly she was conducting sympathetic interviews with her before taking to the newsstands on March the 8th to say it was time to turn the cameras off Jade, asking, is it just me who's starting to feel like the spectre at the feasts? Although I think she meant look, not feel. Luckily for Carol, before they turned the cameras off, she had time to appear in a mawkish ITV Tonight special the very next night.
She made headlines without thinking, and she was perfect.
Of course, the tabloids weren't the only ones jammed full of Jade. No, the self-appointed quality press got in on the act too. They ran plenty of chin-stroking, oh, what does it all mean pieces on the cultural meaning of Jade's suffering. There was a lot of woe betide us intellectual masturbation, which sometimes veered over into outright snobbery, such as in Rod Little's bizarre, venomous article for The Spectator. You know, I've tried to think of something clever to say about Rod Little, but he just comes across as a c***. Throughout the depressing blanket coverage, Jade was repeatedly referred to as a star of reality TV, which she was, although it's more accurate to say she was a star of reality TV and news. After all, in her final weeks, taken accumulatively, she made far more appearances on front pages and news broadcasts than in her living TV specials.
Sally, what's the latest that you've been able to discover about Jade's condition?
The populist news broadcast had exciting live updates, filling us in on each fresh development as and when it happened, often displaying characteristic tact.
We're also hearing that perhaps the cancer has spread to her brain. What's the latest on that, Rachel?
Meanwhile, back in the studio, there was impressive cutting-edge journalism, such as this exchange on 5 News between a reporter and a mysterious flat-screen-faced cyborg.
The boys looked absolutely beautiful on the front page. How important to Jade was it that they had a very happy day packed full of special memories?
Oh, it was very important.
They also repeatedly looped footage of her being wheeled to an ambulance, footage with a cheery watermark in the top right corner, marking it the property of Mr. Paparazzi, the brainchild of fatuous Mel Smith lookalike and almighty human arse-cheek Darren Lyons, seen here on Sky News, giddily commenting on a comment on the sort of press coverage he's a part of.
It's a superb read, and I would love everyone to have a look at this today.
And which I'm now commenting on. This whole thing is a crazy, endless feedback loop. Of course, when the sad news actually arrived, it was broken dramatically live, and we were treated to real-time spooling footage from outside her house, which we were told was a perfectly acceptable thing to do.
This is not any kind of intrusion.
This was followed by emotive coverage of well-wishers leaving flowers.
It has, in this corner of Essex, been a sombre Mother's Day.
And the occasional talking head overstating her good points to a frankly embarrassing degree.
I think for people she's become a saint, a princess, an exemplar of biblical proportions.
Yeah, she's the patron saint of celebrity perfume ranges. At the other extreme, many people were so enraged by what they saw as disproportionate eulogising of Jade, they bravely took to the internet message boards to vent their disproportionate fury. Well, let's take a look at some of these online messages in a feature we like to think of as the Gallery of Hate. Family going through the grieving process, they're just counting the money, says Muffin the Mule. He's used a pseudonym there because he's too scared to use his real name. While many overweight, hysterical people will mourn this loss, I am mourning the loss of what was a great country sleepwalking into communism. Wise words there from Jay Hunt, disguised as idiocy. Paul from London says simply, this is the celebration of ignorance. Empty vessels make the most noise. Well, thanks for bothering to share your views, Paul. Why are we discussing the passing of a talentless, uneducated, attention-seeking, racist bully whose only real legacy is to be responsible for the word minger becoming common speech? Devil's advocate there, talking about a deceased mother of two. Are you people really so vile that you have to have a go at someone after they've died? Asks Bert Friday. Well, yes, I think you'll find they are, Bert. Strong words from Steve Wright here. Leave it be, stick her in the ground and let's all get on with our lives. Well, it's refreshing to see such spite. Horrid though these messages are, I think they're being left by people confused to the point of anger, and it's this cognitive dissonance that reminds me of Schrodinger's cat. Because in my head, at least, the whole Jade saga existed in two states at the same time. Because although the event itself was palpably real, the coverage felt palpably unreal. None of it seemed real, not the gaudy tabloid front pages, not the garish ads for tribute magazines published before she'd even died.
OK Magazine's special tribute issue with wonderful memories of Jade, out now.
Not the constant appearances of Max Clifford looking like a man playing Alistair Darling in a cheap TV movie. Not the tributes from establishment figures who, let's be fair, were only answering questions they'd been asked by the press. In the end, Jade Goody died on the biggest reality show going, not Big Brother or some living TV special, but The News. After all, with its jaunty titles and its easy hate figures, its selective storytelling and its stupid viewer votes, it's a hair's breadth from being a multi-platform I'm a Celebrity spin-off. In fact, all it needs next is a special live edition where Gordon Brown has to eat a Wichita grub or something to win the next election, and then the circle's complete. And then just before the world ends, we can all enjoy a quick look back at some of our best bits. Yeah, well, that's about all we've got time for this evening. Go away.
Next tonight, Rory Maguire is at the mercy of Marcus Brigstock, and he's wielding a pair of straightening irons. I've Never Seen Star Wars is here in just a few moments.